Oh, back now on Caught Offside. JJ, let's get right into this. You've seen and heard her work at The Guardian, ESPN, TalkSport, the Serie A Chronicles, Italian football podcast, and much more. Here to talk all things soccer, but probably with a bit of a Italian focus, is Nicky Bandini. Nicky, thanks so much for joining us.
No props. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I guess let's start with the news of the day here. Paul Pogba, doping ban, 4 years, gone. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to see him again. He's 30, but whatever the best version of Paul Pogba is, I think we can probably confidently say we've seen that and we're not going to see it again. It's such a weird career that he's had. If we were, let's say we were playing a game of word association and I say Paul Pogba, what is the word that comes to mind for you?
Gosh, the one that came straight to my mind was extravagant. And I don't know if that sort of come to everybody's mind. I think that probably your perspective on Paul Pogba would depend on where your focus lies as either a football fan or a journalist or whatever your interest in the sport might be. Obviously, I was covering him in Serie A under Antonio Conte, and to me, I will always remember him being this kid whose talent was so big that Antonio Conte, who you really feel like wanted to ignore it, frankly, perhaps not ignore it, but wanted to do what Conte does and trust in figures that he knew and guys that he trusted to work hard, like Claudio Marchisio, was looking around at this player and thinking, well, I can't leave him out of the team anymore. I can't. He forced his way into a starting 11 at a time when that starting 11 was incredibly competitive, and he did it by being an outrageous talent, by being someone who could play these passes, standing next to Andrea Pirlo and playing passes that looked like they'd come off Pirlo's boots, but also had the range to get up and down the pitch, also showed that combativeness and that willingness to do what Conte requires of all of his players, which is to muck in and work hard. And to me, I think he was an extraordinary footballer, but the extravagance of some of those passes, the connection he had at the time early in that Juventus chapter with Paulo Dybala, who another extravagant footballer, the combinations they had, what I think of is when I think of Paul Pogba is those.
Would it have been better for him, Nicky, in hindsight, to have stayed put and never gone to Manchester United?
Well, never is impossible, right? Because his story was at Manchester United before it was ever at Juventus. That was
Right.
the whole thing, plucking him out of that youth system. Uh, who knows? Who knows? I think this story, obviously, we're talking about it at a time when the news came out today about the 4 year ban. Pogba has said he's going to appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. He said in his words, you know, so I'm paraphrasing, just said in his words, and I'm paraphrasing, so I don't have the quote directly in front of me, but effectively what he said was, the full story isn't out yet, and you will hear the full story. So perhaps there is more to this story than we know, and I think at time of recording, that's probably a prudent thing to say, but when did this happen? If it did indeed happen, who on whose advice has he taken what? How has this test result had to come out? All of that stuff is things that's very dangerous to speculate on. Certainly, he was playing brilliant football in Turin at Juventus before he went to Manchester United. And it's easy to look back on that and think, well, if he just stays, maybe that doesn't change. But I'm not sure life is as static as that. I think things are always going to change as the years pass. People's focus shifts, and sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. One of the reasons that most footballers nowadays don't stay in one place for their whole career is precisely because it's hard to stay at the peak of your focus and attention while doing the same thing every week. So I really don't know if it would have been better for him or not to stay at Juventus. But I mean, of course, we can say that things at Manchester United never quite worked out the way that everyone hoped they would. And when he went back to Juventus, everyone was wanting that to be the moment for him where he gets back to the best of himself. And for this story and perhaps for others, it hasn't happened.
In terms of drugs and Italian football, is this potentially a watershed moment? Because it's interesting. In the last month, I've never heard so much talk about it based on what Gary Neville and Roy Keane were reminiscing about when they come off the field against those Juventus sides at the end of the 90s. And they'd say, well, those guys look so fresh, like they could go again. And there's always been these lingering rumors about Italian football. Is this is this a moment, because he's so high profile? Is this a moment where we start to see more things come to light, do you think?
I think that's dangerous waters to get into. I think what was happening in the 90s and what's happening now are not necessarily connected. I think
Okay.
that what's happening to Paul Pogba is not necessarily indicative of what's happening at a football club. I think that's, again, things that need to be very careful about drawing those conclusions. Look, what happened in the 80s and 90s, I think there's some stories that have been told, and there's stories that I'm certain haven't been told about what was going on in those periods. But I think drawing a straight line from there to Paul Pogba might be taking a step too far.
Okay.
With regards to the suspension itself, this is, our podcast is based in the US, and steroids and PEDs are a big deal here in American sports. Baseball in particular, it's, they're severe, they're harsh with their penalties, but even in baseball, I think for first-time offenders, the punishment is 50 games. Pogba's getting 4 years. This is a huge chunk of a player's career. Is there a sense from people within football that maybe we want to be harsh on this, but 4 years, this penalty may be more harsh than the crime itself?
Yeah. It's very sort of tricky to speculate with new news developments and things that are going to go through an appeal process. We have certainly seen in different areas of the Italian sporting justice some pretty heavy-handed penalties get handed down, and then after appeals get found to fall somewhere in the middle of perhaps in the middle of where the appellant would want them to be, and where the initial judgment was. I think it. Yeah, with this story, I'm just really reluctant to speak too strongly on it until we have full details of Pogba's case, because there's a difference between taking something accidentally and taking something deliberately. There's a difference between taking something once and taking something over a long period of time, and I think there's a lot still to come out in the wash with this story, and things that have been discussed with the doping body that we don't have all the access to yet.
Well, there's something concrete we can talk about, and that's how Americans are taking over Serie A. It's as simple as that. Nicky, what do you put down to how do you explain, I suppose, Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic's great seasons they've had so far?
I think in both cases it comes down to the individual footballer. I think both of them are talented, and both of them are hardworking. There was a rather brutal quote from Stefano Pioli just the other day when he was asked about the difference between how Christian Pulisic's performing and Chukwueze, who arrived in the same transfer window for pretty much the same transfer fee. They're both 20 million euro players, and Samuel Chukwueze has not had anywhere near the impact that Christian Pulisic had. And Pioli was said, well, the thing with Pulisic is he scores goals, he sets up goals, and he works hard. Chukwueze doesn't score goals, he doesn't set up goals, and he doesn't work hard. And that's pretty savage from a manager to say something that way. But that's kind of the truth of it, certainly from Pulisic's standpoint, is he showed up on day one scoring against Bologna, and he really hasn't stopped playing good football all the way through. He's clearly a very hard worker as well. But I think Pulisic is he's a very talented footballer who perhaps for whatever reasons didn't get quite the opportunities that he was hoping for at Chelsea. Well, he faded a little bit after that first start. Perhaps it wasn't even about the opportunities. Perhaps it was about the environment around him and the support he was being given. I think Weston McKennie is an even more clear-cut case of hard work will get you places, because I spoke to him actually a few months ago in an interview for 8x8 magazine, and he pretty much held his own hand up to having not perhaps handled the Leeds chapter as well as he could have done. And he was saying that in his story, this is now a positive because he learned from it. And while he appreciates it won't be for everyone in Leeds something to remember positively, he's treating it as a learning experience, and he's bucking up his ideas basically. And he clearly did go away this summer and work harder than he has before. He came back in tremendous shape, and he's been an absolute pillar of this Juventus team in terms of his work rate and what he gives the team.
Oh, so it was a work rate or a professionalism issue at Leeds?
I don't think he would go as far as to say I wasn't being professional, but I think he basically felt like he was not deliberately, but that he was cruising, that he was thinking that he'd got to a point in his career because he'd got to Juventus because he was starting games for Juventus were going to Leeds. He go to the Premier League, and he was feeling like he didn't have to, I suppose, do the thing that he, again, in his telling, that he thinks got him where he is in his career, which is by outworking everybody. I think he doesn't have this ego about him where he believes that he's got the talent to not work hard. And I think perhaps his perspective on it is that he had got a little bit complacent. He did feel like he'd reached this pinnacle, and then he looked around after that Leeds chapter and thought, well, no, you're not going to be able to stay here unless you work your butt off again, because that's what you did to get here in the first place. And he has. I mean, again, without question, his physical conditioning has been exceptional this season, and I think you could see that from coming back from the summer. And he's talked about that in a few places about how hard he worked in the summer to get that physical conditioning. And then I think there's other parts that come into it. I think one of the fascinating statistics of this season is that Weston McKennie, who's come for 6 or 7 assists now, but every single one of them has gone to Dusan Vlahovic, and
Right.
he and Dusan Vlahovic clearly have a rapport. And when I think about Paul Pogba, to bring it back to that, one of the reasons that things were so great at Juventus for a while was because of his rapport with Paulo Dybala, because you could see when they were on the pitch together, they understood each other, they knew where they wanted to be, they knew where they wanted the ball, they had that relationship. And just at the weekend against Frosinone, that the first of McKennie's assist in particular was a really nice touch, bringing the ball down, which he doesn't always show. He hasn't, and I think again he knows it. He's not the most technical player on that Juventus team, and the cross itself is not perfectly struck, but it's where Vlahovic needs it to be.
Right.
And I think that that combination has been extremely fruitful for Juventus this season.
Nicky, I read that piece in 8x8. It was really good. And it was interesting to hear him talk about sort of, what was it he referred to as his trait as a joker, sort of not like the ha-ha kind of joker, but like a wild card, willing to play in any position. You know, he said he's played fullback. We know him as a midfielder. Do you get a sense, or do you have a thought, where is he best suited to play?
Yeah, I enjoy that joker phrasing of it, because actually in Italian they use the word jolly for a player like that. They use the English word jolly for someone who fits in everywhere. But yeah, he's really, at the beginning of this season, it was this odd dynamic because of course Tim Weah came in as well, also from the United States, and he was expected to play outside McKennie as the right wing back. And then what happened was that McKennie wound up playing a few games in that right wing back spot and playing really well. And again, that I think speaks to this shift in his mindset, because when I spoke to him, I brought up some quotes he'd had before in his career where he said, well, I think I want to play midfield. This is where I think I want to be. I think I can be one of the best in this position. And when I spoke to him, he said, I don't care about that anymore. I just want to be where I can help the team. And I think his mindset going into those games earlier this season when he was at right wing back helped convince Max Allegri that he needed to keep starting McKennie. And since then, he's come back into the midfield, and he is in the really pretty much every game now starting on the right side of a midfield three as the mezzala, the half wing, as they would call it in Italy, and he's been very good there. So I think that he's almost earned his way back into the midfield by playing well at right wing back. But again, I can only tell you what he told me, and what he told me, as you say, is that he's kind of okay now with that idea of being the joker as long as he's helping.
Nicky, is there something in the speed of play that the Premier League is so fast paced, and that Italian football is maybe a couple of beats slower, that might help maybe a player like Pulisic, who struggled with injuries and now seems to be in a great run of form without them? Is there something in that, or do we completely overstate that difference between Serie A and everywhere else?
No, I think the difference is real. I think that the pace of different of divisions, the different leagues, different countries, the style of football is different. For Kaya Tomori, I remember making this analogy when I spoke to him a while ago about the Premier League is more like an NBA game. You're just going end to end constantly, and perhaps the Serie A is more like an NFL game where you are going to stop and think about your plays and have that moment of more consideration in the way that you do your build-up play. I think that it's certainly true that some footballers, for that reason, fit better into one style than another. I don't know if it's oversimplifying it in the case of Pulisic, because I would argue that the Bundesliga, where he obviously excelled, is a really helter-skelter league where
Yeah.
the ball flies up and down, and he fit in very well there. And I think that there's sometimes an over fixation on this league is that, this league is this, and this team and this style of football works here and it doesn't work there. When I think that the single greatest reality in every footballer's career is that the team you're on and the coach you have are the biggest factors in whether or not they're going to get the most out of you. And I think that Chelsea's been a tumultuous place to be for a number of seasons, and Milan might yet be that again. Stefano Pioli has had plenty of heat on him this season. I think some of it unfairly. And so we'll see whether or not he comes back next season. But if there's one thing you could definitely say for Pioli, is he has shown with a number of young players this ability to take them on and develop them and help them get the best out of themselves. I know Pulisic's not young anymore, but you can look at someone like Tonali, who, when he first came from Brescia to Milan, everyone was looking at him and going, this kid's not going to make it. Everyone was billing him as the next Pirlo, but he came in and he didn't play well. But with time, he grew into someone who really did play brilliantly last season, got that move to Newcastle, and then a whole story with gambling, which meant he hasn't played this season, but his footballing development has been really strong. And I know again that for Pioli, that man management is a really big part of what he sees his role as, and I'm sure that's part of it. I just, with the leagues thing, I always sort of feel like there's this need to like push back and point out that it happens in both directions, right? Paquetá did not have a good time in Serie A at all, and he's doing great in the Premier League. So it's not as simple as going to a different league and that being all the answers. But I do think there is some truth that runners are less common in Serie A, or have been, and that was a clear focus for Pioli in his team rebuilding over the summer. What he asked the directors to get him was runners, to line breakers. It's what he wanted in his midfielders. It's why they've got Loftus-Cheek in as well, players who are going to make that those moves up from midfield to take the focus away from it always just being Teo Hernandez and Rafael Leao on the other side.
Nicky, one more for you on the American angle. Yunus Musa, Tim Weah, a couple guys who have made their mark with the U.S. men's national team. Weah especially scored in a World Cup. What about in Serie A this year? Have they been able to make an impact? Have we seen signs of growth from them so far?
Yeah, those are definitely the two who are struggling a bit more. Tim Weah again arrived, a lot of I would say more buzz around Tim McKennie when he first arrived. And I think that at the beginning it was this slightly interesting situation where him and McKennie are great friends. They spent a lot of their time together off the pitch, but McKennie had taken that right wing back spot and it didn't seem like Weah was going to get in. And then McKennie moves inside and Weah got to start a couple of games. But I think honestly, he just hasn't really played that great when he's had the opportunities. And now Cambiaso's come in and is playing better, and Weah's back squeezed out again. Now, Tim Weah has talked about this being not his ideal position. He prefers playing further up the pitch. He prefers playing behind the attack instead of as a right wing back. He prefers playing on the left where he can cut in onto his stronger foot. He's talked about those things. Those things aren't going to change as long as Max Allegri is the manager. So whether or not the situation can improve from Juventus pretty much depends on whether or not Max Allegri is going to stay the manager going forward. And it's not a totally closed conversation, even though a lot of people have given Allegri a lot of credit for keeping Juventus competitive for a large part of the season. I think there is this question hanging in the air at Juventus about whether Allegri is a modern enough manager for where Juventus is trying to get to. I think when you look at the football being played by Inzaghi's Inter, it's a different thing completely. And I think there are people at Juventus who are asking that question. On the other hand, they're second in Serie A, and the priority this season was to make sure they were getting back into the Champions League. So he's on course for his biggest goal, and they still have a chance, a pretty good chance, I would say, to win the Coppa Italia as well, given who's left in the competition. So we'll see. But Weah does feel like he's not really got, talking about clubs and fits, a club that he fits into what the manager wants to do right now. Musa, I felt like had a fairly bright start, and it just feels like over time he's not been able to make the case that he should be starting ahead of other people. Gianni Reinders is another player who came in the summer for Milan, has been excellent. Benacer obviously was the holdover who's had some injury problems, but now he's back healthy. He's getting into the starting lineup again. And Yassine Adli's been the one who's come into the team recently and performed really well. And it's not like Moose has been awful, but when you look at again what Pioli's trying to do, he wants to have, I think he's a long way behind, unfortunately, than he was Inter, but trying to have a more fluid midfield, trying to have a setup where everyone can exchange roles. Loftus-Cheek in that mix as well as the one who can push on and break the lines. It just feels like Musa doesn't do some of those things quite as well as the others do. When you get into the numbers, he doesn't win the ball as much as Adli does. He doesn't contribute to the attack as much as someone like Loftus-Cheek does. I think there's just not one area where he's standing out right now. And I think that in that pecking order, he's just gradually slid back a little bit.
Nicky, I can't let you go before I ask you about Luciano Spalletti and what's happening with the Italian national team. I saw a lot of quotes last week about banning PlayStations and also a lot of, I mean, big talk about winning the European Championships in the summer, how this is the aim, and pride in the shirt, and like lots of positive, lots of passion. Is this the right guy to reset the course for the national team, or is this another one where you're like, we just possibly don't have the players?
I think there's undoubtedly a gap in the talent available to Italy right now to some of the other countries in Europe. I mean,
yeah,
it's hard not to look at what England have and think it's an extraordinary group when you look at the likes of Grealish and Foden and Bellingham and Harry Kane in front of that. Italy don't have that wealth of attacking talent. They simply don't. They have some players who I think perhaps have never had their chance to put forward quite how good they are on the international stage yet. Nicola Barella at Inter, and Bastoni as well. I think I was having a conversation with someone just the other day about young players, and I was saying, well, he's not that young anymore. He's 24, but he hasn't got to go to a World Cup, of course, because of everything that's happened. And I do think
right.
He's the next figurehead of the Italian defence for a long time after the Chiellini and Bonucci generation, which of course was a generation that won the Euros. Do I think that Luciano Spalletti is a brilliant manager and has a chance to do as well with this group as anybody? Yeah, of course. He won the league with Napoli. It's something that hadn't happened in 33 years. He's a character.
Right.
When you listen to Francesco Totti, who had an interesting relationship with Spalletti, who was someone who helped Totti play some of the best football of his career, but then became almost an enemy by the end at Roma, because Spalletti was the one who gradually forced him out of that Roma team because the ownership wanted him to, but was the man who did it. But Totti talks about Spalletti being mad, and when he says mad, run down the corridors naked mad is the way he would put it. So Spalletti is a character, but I think that winning international tournaments truthfully comes down to more than just your talent pool. I think it comes down to chemistry. I think it comes down to timing. It comes down to having everyone in the right form and the right mindset in the tournament, because the tournament is a very concentrated, very intense period of time. And I think that Mancini caught some magic in the bottle at the Euros, and it came down to all sorts of things, including, I think, his relationship with Luca Vialli and the friendship that they sort of embodied and the vibe that carried through the whole team. It's too soon to know whether Spalletti can capture that again, but I think he's a very talented coach, and he's got as good a chance as anybody.
Nicky, last one from me. I wanted to ask about Roma. Mm-hmm. So Mourinho exits, De Rossi comes in, the results have changed for the better quickly. Is this becoming another stick with which to beat Mourinho?
For some people, yes. And I feel like as soon as I praise De Rossi anywhere, I get told that it's because I'm a Mourinho hater. And that seems to be one of those areas of the internet. As soon as you say anything that could be perceived as not praising Jose Mourinho, you're a hater. I just was talking about vibes, right, with national teams, but I do think that De Rossi has raised the mood in Rome. There's a lot of players who look more relaxed, look like they're having more fun, look like they're being empowered to go and play attacking football in ways they weren't before. I don't know if it will last. I don't know if it will be forever. I think that watching this team the last few weeks, they certainly defensively look more fragile than they did under Mourinho. So you could spin that around. But I do think there's been this shift in philosophy from under Mourinho. There was this mindset that, well, we've got Dybala, we've got Lukaku, we've got Pellegrini. Maybe we just need to play tight defensive football and trust that those players will resolve games for us. Whereas it feels like De Rossi has flipped the proposition on his head and said, well, we've got Lukaku, we've got Dybala, we've got Pellegrini. Let's go and attack and see what happens. And so far, it's going pretty well.
Mourinho, the scenes, every time he leaves an Italian club, it's drama in some way, whether it's Materazzi hugging him and crying, but the scenes for a manager where things were clearly just not probably reached an end or a conclusion, absolutely unbelievable, Nicky.
Yeah, look, they loved him in Rome, and he sold that stadium out. Of course, the players have their part in it, but him arriving was the biggest catalyst in that stadium being sold out for the best part of 2.5 seasons in a way that it hadn't. And it's been a long time since we've seen that energy and that excitement around the Stadio Olimpico. He took them to European finals in 2 consecutive seasons, and came really close to winning both of them. Did win the first one, the Europa Conference League, and went to a penalty shootout against the team that never loses the Europa League, right? Against Sevilla. So on the surface, you really can't knock his record in a big way. You can say, yes, that Europa League final was miserable to watch, and every single game was another cause of an argument and a polemic, and the referees were a disgrace and all the rest of it, and there was someone getting sent off from his sideline every game. You can talk about the mood of it and how that looked, but results wise, he wasn't doing badly. It's a bit more ambiguous in the league, because yes, in the league he didn't really take the team on from where it was under Fonseca, but 2 European finals for Roma certainly is no small change.
Yeah. Nicky, before we let you go, speaking of European finals, I just wanted to get in one last question. Talked about Inter before. They're running away with the league. They've been to a Champions League final. Should they be? It doesn't feel like they kind of get their due when we talk about Man City or Real Madrid or who the contenders are. Should they be in that category?
Yes, obviously. And I've been saying this since the beginning of the season. And I think that that some people have not been paying attention, because yes, they went to a Champions League final where they got very little respect from the international media. They then played really well in that Champions League final, and people looked and said, oh, they were better than we thought they would be. And then it's like everyone forgot that. Yeah, I had some questions over the summer about how you deal with losing Lukaku and Dzeko and Onana. But it became pretty quickly apparent that Marcus Thuram was going to be a great fit. And the football they're playing now is without question better than the football they were playing 12 months ago. So why shouldn't they go to another Champions League final? I think there's one clear favourite ahead of them, which is Manchester City. There's probably a second, I would say, a step ahead of them in Real Madrid. After that, I don't see that there's any teams in this draw that should be marked clearly ahead of Inter as a favourite to go far. Having said that, look, they're playing Atletico Madrid, who are a great team and could knock them out even from 1-0 down when you go back to play in Madrid. But I don't see another team in Europe other than those 2 that I just mentioned that I think has the right to consider itself above last season's Champions League finalists, who got better since then.
Yeah, well, there you go. Good stuff. Nicky Bandini, we appreciate your time, your insight. Thanks so much. We'll have to do this again. Take care.
Anytime.
You've been listening to the Caught Offside Soccer Podcast.